Hi guys, Noomis here. Welcome to a brand new Cities Skylines series called Northam City. This will be a city set in the Northeastern United States, and inspiration will mainly be from New York City, but I'm definitely not going for like a one-to-one build. I might also be taking inspiration from other cities like Boston and Philadelphia later on, and also Chicago. And if you think the name is kind of inspired by Gotham City in the Batman universe, you'd be right. I've always been a big Batman fan, and because Gotham City is in many ways a fictional version of New York City, it's another great reference for the city that I'm building here. What I mostly will take from Gotham City though, is that it feels a bit grittier and grimier than present day New York is. Kind of like a New York before gentrification has hit historically industrial areas and low income neighborhoods. There will also be some Easter eggs in street names among others from the Gotham City universe, and maybe I'll do some smaller builds that are more directly inspired from it, but I'll get back to that another time if it becomes relevant. So to talk about what I'm actually building on screen, I'm starting off with what will be an industrial waterfront area. I use these great dock networks that are just perfect for this kind of build. Usually I like to start my cities in a very central area with a major transit hub, but I wanted to try something different this time. So this part of the city will be more inspired by Queens and Brooklyn. I've looked around industrial areas in mostly the northern part of Queens by the coast, where you will have things like sewage treatment plants, power plants and other important industrial areas for the city to function, so city services in the game. I started off by putting a barge port. The main function for this would be supplying the power plant that will be put right nearby, as this is a power plant that runs on oil. Because of this, I'll also be putting plenty of oil tankers around. This will be a great detail as well as being great from a functional aspect in the game. Next to the power plant you can see me putting down this big transformer station, and I'll attach some wires from that onto some high voltage lines that will run out from this area and probably connect to somewhere in the city at a later point. To be honest, I don't really know how all this works with how a power plant is connected with the electric grid of the city, or how the electric grid of the city looks from a functional standpoint. But I'm just trying to build something that looks sensible as a part of the greater city. When I've gotten the main assets in, as well as some container rows and parking lots, it's time to get some details in. A lot of details and fitting industrial props to make this come alive, just make it a bit rough because an industrial area like this won't look super clean. It's gonna be more than just the power plant in this industrial area, and I will comment briefly on that when we get there. For now I'll just turn up the music and leave you to watch the build time-lapse. The rest of the industrial area will be filled up by a sewage treatment plant, as well as a waste processing plant. This sewage treatment plant building is actually from Nagasaki, but I still think the look of it was really fitting, and there aren't really any big writings that will make it scream Japanese. I imagine this would probably hold a lot of offices and different facilities to manage a treatment plant. Around it I'll use the same assets I always use for sewage treatment, with the basins and clarifiers, which are from 1x69 if I remember correctly. For the waste processing I actually use some vanilla assets from a DLC, because I think these buildings look really great on their own. They only need some work to replace and remove some vanilla props to make it blend with the rest of what is around them. So I'm just doing some changes with Bob. I didn't mention it earlier, but I used these plain pavement roads and rough them up a bit. I use IMT to place some road wear decals along them, and this is a method I really like doing for a build like this. From what I can tell on pictures, there won't be actual street with sidewalks, but just parts the vehicles take on a larger paved area, kind of. This is a method I will definitely use more in other industrial areas to detail up the roads quickly, so I can save both on time and that daunting prop limit. Other details around I'll do is more cracked and patched decals and lots of trash and just other general clutter that you'll find in an industrial site. Something I noticed on Google Earth in many industrial areas are these mobile offices, I think they're called, like the ones you see all the time on construction sites, for example. I'm not exactly sure what purpose they would serve here, but I imagine it could hold break rooms or something like that for people working here. I'm also adding in some rusty boards parked along the dock, just because it adds to that grittiness, and it's something I've definitely seen. After I've finished the industrial area, I'm making some changes to the road network in the city. There's some highways nearby from before, when the map was made, but I demolished a lot of them to plan out what I want for this part of the city. This peninsula will have two boroughs of the city, Astoria in the north where I built so far, and then you have Oakland to the south of this peninsula, and an elevated highway will run right through the middle of them. The highway will be named the Astoria-Oakland Expressway. Even though it is only within the limits of Astoria, it serves both boroughs, feeding directly into a big boulevard that connects the two. For the interchange, it was important to me getting it as compact as possible, because this will be pretty much right by the central areas of both boroughs. This is probably not very optimal for traffic flow, but it doesn't really need to be. Like you see in cities like, for example, New York, this is a highway that has been forced into a very old city, which isn't suitable for car dependency. I didn't really need them. The highway and the interchange took all the space it was able to, and the most important thing was simply to connect the highway to the street grid here, which it did. Just throwing you right into the middle of a big and busy boulevard, which it seems like happens also on the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway, which is the main inspiration for this highway. There was probably some demolition like with many urban highways in America, but I imagine this highway will have closely followed the right-of-way for a train line in the same spot, and there would have been a lot of industrial use here, and probably still there's some left. I won't build any train lines here in this episode. This is just what I imagine the story behind the highway is, and I need to connect up the district to outside connections before I build the first neighborhood, which will be right across the street from the industrial area I just built. I'll probably do the train line here at a later point once I know what to do with the area and station, etc. What I do with the highway for now is just hook it into an interchange that is already there, and a highway that goes all the way to an outside connection. And on the other end I extend it to the coastline, and I imagine this would continue as a bridge across the bay at a later point. There's going to be plenty of elevated metro lines as part of the Northam City subway, inspired mainly by Brooklyn and Queens, and of course the legendary Chicago L. This first station I place down will serve the first neighborhood that I'm going to build out in this episode. It's actually modeled after an elevated station in Berlin, but the architecture reminded me a lot of some stations I've seen in Queens, and I think I can make it blend in really well with changing out and adding some extra details to it. Right along the industrial area there's a short section where the tracks go along the road, but for most of the line it will sit directly above the street, with stations that fit that purpose. I'm also placing down a New York City elevated station further down the road, but that will just sit there undetailed for now, and I'll come to detail it when I build a neighborhood around it in another episode.
This is the end of side 1 of this record. Please now, turn it over for the second side. The second side.
The area below elevated infrastructure like these metro tracks is perfect to add some details that tells something about the state of the city. I mentioned that the city will have some problems with crime and homelessness, and to convey that I'm building out some homeless camps in these dirty and overgrown areas below the tracks. It might be a bit ugly, but it really tells something about the city, and I will add more of this in many different parts throughout the city. The neighborhood here, sitting right next to an industrial lot, is a place that has problems with poverty and crime. I imagine this started off as a working class neighborhood, but things turned around to do worse in more modern times for the area. I'll be plopping zonable buildings down like I always do, and I kept a lot of this out not to be too repetitive. Since this is towards the outskirts of the city and this district, I want to keep a certain height limit here and gradually increase it as we get closer to more central areas. The transition will be more sudden than a comparable city, however, just because of the big difference in scale in this game. For the most part, I'll try to stick to buildings 2 to 4 stories high here, which will increase the further away we get from the industrial area and towards the more central area to the south. My thinking is that the land value isn't the highest right by this lot with the power plant, sewage treatment and garbage processing, but it still has some value because of the metro line running through. addition to the elevated metro station, I'm putting down this 4-track underground station right below this wide street. For now I only connected to 2 entrances, but I will talk more about the station and line later when I do more with it. And the reason I put it right below the street is because I want it to look like it's been built cut and cover, like a lot of old metro lines would have been. With the street in front mostly done, I'm heading over to detail station. The asset has this weird and steep ramp going up, so I'm plopping down a set of stairs on top to make it look more sensible, with some ticket barriers at the top. For the signage, I take a lot of inspiration from the New York City subway. The station is named Bergen Boulevard Station after the street it sits on. I've got a great font for PO which lets me add color-coded lines on the sign. And this will be the 4th train that runs through here. There were historically 2 rail companies that built urban rapid transit, and like New York City there will also be both numbered and letter lines because of this. Next to the name of the line, the direction for the entrance is written, as this station has side platforms. Oakland and Manhattan are the name of the 2 other boroughs of the city. Oakland being to the south on the same peninsula, while Manhattan is the oldest and original part of the city, with the main downtown of the city. I know that the sign says subway even though this is an elevated metro, but that is just the name for the entire system, which has a combination of both underground and elevated sections across the lines. I have also gone ahead and made a logo for the fictional transit agency of the city, NMTA, which is short for Northam City Metropolitan Transit Authority. NMTA is in charge of the rapid transit and bus systems within the city, as well as some commuter lines for the metro area, which crosses city borders. Something I've seen a lot of in references when I looked for inspiration is a lot of overhead power lines lining the streets, and this was a detail I wanted to add to the city. This won't be absolutely everywhere in the city. In more central areas, the power lines would be underground. I have some decorative networks and props that I place along the street with IMT to make the process quicker and easier. And I love how it adds to the messy and gritty look of this part of the city. If you want to know more about how I did this or which assets I've used, just let me know.
Looking
To add some more life to the streets, I place a lot more signs and some graffiti. I really want this to come across as a very mixed-use neighborhood, as is common in the older northeastern cities. And this will be how most of the streets in the city will be, with some exception of course. Just to break up the space a little and add to the realism, I built out this little gas station in the middle of the neighborhood. There will be less car users and gas stations than your typical American city, because of how the city is laid out. But it would be in neighborhoods like this, in the outskirts and near industry, you'd be most likely to find a gas station. Usually I don't love to have bike lanes, which are just a bucket of paint on the road. But if I'm gonna have some bike infrastructure in this city, this is what makes most sense. I tried some roads with bike lanes, but they didn't really blend as well with the roads that I hoped, that I'm using as I hoped. A workaround I found was to just remove parking from the roads, and then add an invisible bike lane in its place. Then add the color and lines with IMT. I really like how this worked out, and I kept the road design intact. There's a few empty walls around, and while it makes sense to cover many of them in graffiti, I want to add some murals to some of the bigger and more visible ones. This is one of my favorite details to add. I'll do lots more of this, at least in this part of city, and probably in most of the city, to be honest, because I think street art just makes sense in a city like this when you think about the inspirations for it. The streets around the station really should have some small bars and pubs, and while I struggled finding lots of assets for this in the workshop, there are these DIY Greek doors, which can go for wooden doors just about anywhere, I think. What I did was make them leisure commercial in Rico settings, and I then used Bob to add some stairs in front, and a random template for different pub signs that I have downloaded. Then I will just fit them in wherever I can find a good spot. So this is a detail that I was very excited about adding, and this is street signs. I know it sounds a bit weird, but when I was walking around New York myself, these iconic green street signs just felt like such a big part of the streetscape, and I wanted to have something like that in Northam City. Beforehand, I've gone over the street names. I changed a lot of them, but some streets I also kept the name of if I felt they were fitting, and I focused mostly on renaming the major avenues and boulevards. A lot of these are real streets that I just stole the name of. To make the street signs, I found a great pack of US street signs, which I converted to PO so that I can adjust them and write the street names. After I get an initial setup or layout, I go over all the junctions and copy over the street signs, get them in place, and then change to the correct street names. It's a bit tedious, but after a while the process gets more streamlined, and it adds a lot to the look of the street. For entrances to the underground station, I do a lot of the same detailing that I did over at the elevator station. As you can see, this station will have the C train stopping, and is therefore part of the other division of subway lines in the city. One of the directions for the line says Burlington. This is another borough of the city, which sits northeast of here and will be directly north of Manhattan, which I mentioned earlier is the oldest part of the city and main downtown. The name comes from another American build on YouTube by a channel called El Demetrius Place, and the name is a tribute to this great series that sadly had to end a bit earlier than we hoped. Hopefully I can keep the city going for long enough to build in that part of the city. Similar to New York, I wanted to have sections of the subway which has both express and local lines, and there was a lot of trial and error to get this working. I'm not an expert on this system as I've only been there once, but I will try to briefly explain how this works, at least on the lines that I rode. The section will have 4 tracks running, with the local lines on the 2 outer tracks, while the express trains run on the 2 inner tracks. All stations will then have 4 tracks. Then you will have some stops with only 2 side platforms, and only the trains on the outer tracks will stop, with the express train bypassing the station on the inner tracks. This will be what you call a local stop. And then at other stops you will have both express trains and local trains stopping on all tracks, which will be called an express stop. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but that's my basic understanding of it, at least on those lines with 4 tracks. I know some lines also have a 3-track layout, but I won't get into that, and I'm not gonna use that in this city. This is a pretty unique layout, and I think it's great because it allows you to save time when going longer distances across the city, as frequent stops increases travel time quite a lot, with the train constantly accelerating and decelerating, on top of the time spent at stations with people getting off and on. The method I found working best was to actually use the 4-track bypass station tracks between stations. I use adapted networks to remove all props and cover it with a brick retaining wall. I also had to do a lot of work with lane connector to make sure the local and express lines will stay in their respective tracks, and do a temporary loop at the end for the express trains to turn around. I'll find a better way to have an end station when I actually know how long the lines will go. And the station right here will only be a local stop, but I do set up the express lines with the other stations already, just so I have the system started and I can adjust where the actual station will sit later on when I actually build on those places. Inside the station I'm doing some pretty basic detailing. Station name signs and platform signs to show you the line and direction stopping here, and some exit signs. And also went into Bob on the station earlier just to change out ticket machines and other things like that. So that is it for today's episode. I really hope you enjoyed it if you made it this far, and I really appreciate it. Like, comment and subscribe would be greatly appreciated and would help me grow the channel. I know CS1 is kind of dead on YouTube right now, but I'm still gonna do a bit of it just because I enjoy it. I don't know how long exactly this series will go, and I don't know how frequent I will post episode. I think it will just be something like I post episode as soon when I feel like it and when I've felt inspired to build something. It is just a hobby after all. Anyways, I also have a Patreon if you wish to support me further, but of course I appreciate just like a like and comment and just watching the video. Anyways, I hope you see you next time, and stay tuned for just a few short cinematics.